So we're driving over in the car this morning, and Dorianne says, "What's your topic today?" And I said, "A consciousness of love." But I wasn't certain, and she looked at me and says, "You don't sound like you're very happy about that." And I couldn't put my finger on what the problem was, except that wasn't what I was talking about, as I just discovered when the first slide came up. Well, I'm flexible, so whoever made these slides this week, I'm going to have a conversation with them. So what is joy? Well, it's not just happiness. Joy in a spiritual sense is an essential, we would call it a quality of the divine. That there's an element of our basic nature and the basic nature of all things to express joy. And you know it when you are experiencing it, but quite often it's one of those really elusive qualities because we tend to be very amenable to finding reasons not to be joyful. Sometimes we think, well, in order to really feel joy and happiness, everything has to be in line and everything has to be perfect and no one can be suffering and there can't be any issues in my life. Anyone ever had an issue in their life that like the one I'm talking about? Yeah. Yeah. We do give those a lot of attention, don't we? You know, we live a lot on our problems. Matter of fact, we have whole relationships based on them. You know, you go to lunch with your friends, and you have certain friends that you go and you just kind of tell them what's wrong in your life, and they've only agreed to be your friend and listen to that, so you will listen to what's wrong in their life, and you'll try to think, well, gee, what's wrong in my life isn't as bad as what's wrong in their life, and then you feel sad. Isn't that interesting? You want to have a bigger problem than the person you're sharing your problems with. It's sort of like we wear our stress as a merit badge, you know. You think you had a bad week. Ha ha. Let me tell you what happened to me. It's interesting how that works. So joy, on the other hand, is something that it's not something we have to bring in from out here. It's something that's already within us. But like all of the amazing qualities that we possess, it has to be expressed and cultivated so that it can come out. Paul Schrader says, what fascinates me are people who want to see one thing, but who behave in a way contradictory to that, who might say, I want to be happy, but I keep doing things that make me unhappy. Now, we always have good reasons for doing things that make us unhappy, or so we tell ourselves and tell our friends, but in reality, I think what's really going on is we have been conditioned to feel inadequate about ourselves. And this seems to be fairly universal. You know, I've never met anyone that I can really think of that doesn't have some element of that sense of inadequacy or insecurity that shows up. Even people that can be generally very successful and seem to be very happy, and they still have moments or areas in their life where it's, woe is me, right? That seems to be part of the human condition, and maybe it's something that part of our journey in this experience is to move beyond that. I also know a lot of people that can be depressed for 3 weeks and not be alarmed, but if they have 3 really good days, they get concerned. You know, Gay and Kathleen Hendricks call that an upper limits problem. How much good can you stand before you get nervous? And we do have that capacity because we've decided along the way, as part of our conditioning or part of the result of it, how much good we can stand and how much bad we can stand. And a lot of times we talk ourselves into having a great capacity for difficulty in our lives and a lesser capacity for joy and success. Sometimes when things go too well, you start to feel guilty. Or you start to feel, whoa, you know, I just had 3 good days in a row. Tomorrow's probably going to be awful. It's interesting. And it's something we don't even necessarily think about that much. We just kind of roll with it, you know. My father used to say, to give you some idea of my conditioning, My father used to say, there's just a little black cloud that follows me around and rains on just me. He used to say that a lot. He was pretty miserable most of his life, with occasional periods of joy that usually involved alcohol. He had to self-medicate to feel anything other than negativity. Not unusual. Okay. There's big business in cultivating self-loathing in this culture. You know, turn on cable news. You can get angry according to your political preference. Not a lot of joy on any of those channels. You know, well, here's some good news. One of our opponents was killed today. You know, that's kind of about as good as it gets. Or one of our opponents is in a scandal, and we savor it. Then we wonder why we're not. I don't know. I go to bed at night and I don't feel good. I don't know what it is. I was righteously angry most of the day. Is that a real siren or is that your phone? It's your phone though. So nobody's in trouble. Okay, you're just a little embarrassed. Okay. It's okay, we'll make this a joyous moment. It's not a big deal. I was going to do a treatment for wherever the sirens were going. That's what I like to do, you know. Ernest Holmes said, I believe in a religion of happiness and joy, which made him a radical. There is too much depression and sorrow in the world. Religion should be a spontaneous song of joy and not a funeral dirge. From the fullness of a joyous heart, the mouth should speak. From the fullness of a joyous heart, the mouth should speak. You know, Ernest used to run around. Ernest was kind of an interesting guy. He's very short, very jolly. He would invite people over to his house after services, after he would speak, and he'd make a big pot of stew. And they would sit around and just have conversations, you know, and it was very joyful. But he would also go out into the world. There's one great story of where he and, I can't think of the fellow's name now. I think it was Reginald Armour. They happened to find out about this prostitute that was in trouble. Was living in some kind of a motel hotel down in L.A., and she had come in from the center of the country to make her way in Hollywood, and that didn't work out, and she ended up destitute and was picked up by someone who was kind of pimping her out, and somehow they got in touch with her, and Ernest and Reginald went down to the brothel, and they snuck her out, took her to the train station, gave her money for a train home. So he did stuff like that too. You know, it wasn't like he avoided contact with those that were suffering. He kept a brown paper bag full of cash in his office closet. And if somebody came in and they really needed help, he would go in there and get some money out and give it to them. You know, he was very much involved in the world around him. That didn't depress him. He wasn't turned off by people who were in need or who were suffering. He saw that as an opportunity to help awaken a beautiful soul. You know, sometimes we're conditioned. Part of our conditioning is to kind of practice avoidance, to stay away from that which we find disturbing or difficult, to try to keep it out of our lives. And that's certainly understandable. But the problem with that is, if you go back to the idea, a basic teaching of metaphysics is that it's all one. There's only one thing happening here. Everything is part of the unified field, to put a scientific term on it. That God is infinite, and therefore everything that exists is part of that infinite. And anything I turn away from is also God. Joseph Campbell said, the ultimate spiritual realization is to say yes to whatever's in front of you. To not turn away or reject anything. that if there's a big pile of poop on your porch, that's yours to deal with. Or there's a big pile of poop in your life. It's yours to deal with because somehow you called it in. And if there's a big pile of joy on your porch, that's yours to deal with as well. Yours to have and to experience, to move through, to transcend what we would call negative and to align with what we would call positive. Because it's all the same thing. What did Shakespeare write? There is nothing either good nor bad, only thinking makes it so. Now, we would say there's things we don't want in our lives. We don't want to suffer. We don't want pain. We don't want disease. But if it shows up as everything must show up by right of consciousness, as we would teach. We'd say, yeah. But then we have a hard time disassociating that from the idea that there must be something wrong with me if it showed up. I must be to blame. And the answer, no. As Louise Hay says, blame is always off the track. It showed up, whatever shows up in your life is there because somehow you called it forth so it could call something forth out of you. Somehow, some way. And we have to deal with that at the consciousness that we have in the moment. You don't get creative in a crisis. In a crisis, when you're in a reactive mode, you can only react from what's there, right? I can't all of a sudden rise up 5 or 6 levels of awareness when the poop is on the porch. I have to deal with it from whatever consciousness I have cultivated to that point. And that consciousness may be inadequate to move through that challenge and to transcend it. But there is something in there that in the process of moving forward, I will grow beyond it if that's how I see it. There's a lot of, it's very difficult. In class when we get into some of these things in a deeper level, people will say, well, how come babies are born deformed or with disease? Did that baby create that in their consciousness? And the answer would be no, not specifically. The baby in the womb wasn't thinking negative thoughts, probably, that brought on some kind of a specific ailment or something like that. No, that's not how it works. But until we cultivate a trained mind, we are subject to what's called the law of averages. And the law of averages, I think I have let's put that up because that's kind of funny. The law of averages, this little baby is subject to the law of averages. The law of averages says that until you figure out how to get beyond the law of averages, you're subject to the biological and other kinds of elements of your consciousness. And the way it seems that we evolve is through a process where we show up differently. Every child isn't the same. Every child doesn't have the same set of DNA. There's little mutations, they call them, which is really a poor name for what shows up. It's not really a mutation. It's really kind of a trial DNA little thing to see if this works. And sometimes that results in the appearance of a disease. And sometimes that child doesn't survive. Or it survives with some kind of what we would call a deformity or a difficulty or something like that. How do we account for that when we're talking about why can't we all just be joyful? Well, Ernest Holmes spoke about this to some extent in the textbook, where he says that if the creative intelligence of the universe, and I don't want you to think of God as a being or something with a human consciousness, it's more of a process and a force that's unfolding, that is impersonal. But if that creative element or that creative intelligence of the universe had set things in motion in such a way that everything would always have worked out for us at the human level, we'd always be happy to sit around under a tree in a big pile of money with ice cream everywhere, whatever would be your vision of what would be good. And you didn't have any challenges or any difficulties to face. No one would ever betray you. No one would ever leave you. It would be perfect, right? But here's the problem. When you get into the physical realm, out of perfection, nothing new can be made. We'd all be end results. But we're not end results. We're part of the process of unfolding whatever creation is heading toward, and we're kind of in the middle somewhere. When you step back and look at the whole timeline that's going to run ahead of us, we're sort of in the middle. We are the fodder of which the new will arise, the vehicle through which the new will arise, assuming we don't all kill ourselves. But something new will still arise if that happens. Therefore, the nature of the reality in which we find ourselves is imperfect in the sense that we're still working things out. And we're working things out at every level, biologically, mentally, emotionally, socially, culturally. A lot of trial and error going on. And if we can't accept that that's the nature of things, then we will suffer more than we might otherwise. We will not be in joy because we'll be resenting the nature of reality, and to resent the nature of reality, as Byron Katie says, is to resent God, because that's what God is. God is reality. When you argue with reality, you lose. Haven't you noticed? So we could say, gee, couldn't they've done a better job of creating this universe? Joseph Campbell says, those who say that are unfit to even take the first step toward enlightenment. If you can't embrace it the way it is, you're not going to live in joy. And he says, we have to learn to live joyfully in the sorrows of the world. You can't cure the world of sorrow, but you can learn to live in joy. And someone says, well, how do you do that, Joseph? And he says, you have to see the radiance everywhere. In the worst thing you encounter, the radiance is there. In the most cruel human act, the radiance is there. In the most repellent individual or group of people, the radiance is there. But if I turn away from it, I reject it, and it's on my path, I'm taking myself out of alignment. I'm saying I reject that portion of reality that I'm not comfortable with. And reality doesn't accept that as an answer. So that's the challenge we face, really, to be joyful. If I'm going to wait to be joyful until the world gets straightened out, I hope I get many lifetimes, because it ain't happening in this one. And oh, that's negative. Well, come on. You know, if you're afraid to entertain a negative possibility, you don't understand this teaching. This teaching is not about being religiously positive. It's about seeing the reality as it is and knowing you have within you access to that which will allow you to rise to any challenge. And challenges there will be. Hugh Sidney says, above all else, go with a sense of humor. It's needed armor. Joy in one's heart and some laughter on one's lip is a sign that the person down deep has a pretty good grasp of life. Not humor that deprecates, not humor that is designed to put someone else down, but humor at the human condition, at your own inadequacies. Your inadequacies should be a source of great humor to you. But many of us are conditioned to never let them see you're weak, never let them see there's a problem with you, so you walk around like this, and you get very rigid and very stiff, and you're just no fun at all. I think God has a sense of humor. Look at this. Is this the work of a serious artist? I don't think so. I think it's sort of somewhere between the first dab of paint on the canvas and the finished canvas, which will be a few eons from now. We have to take ourselves lightly, or we're weighed down by our own baggage. If my problems are that important that I have to give them all my attention, and most of that attention is regretful and sad and negative and resentful, then I'm carrying around a burden that isn't really mine to carry. I've picked up the wrong burden. This is a little long, but Rumi is so brilliantly writes, says, sorrow prepares you for joy. It violently sweeps everything out of your house so that new joy can find space to enter. It shakes the yellow leaves from the bough of your heart so that fresh green leaves can grow in their place. It pulls up the rotten roots so that new roots hidden beneath have room to grow. Whatever sorrow shakes from your heart, far better things will take their place. See, if we don't recognize sorrow as transitory, if we don't recognize the feeling of sorrow as something that is essential to us so that we can move through and grieve what needs to go, we can get trapped into it and the sorrow becomes despair. And the despair will become resentment. And resentment is like taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. It just doesn't work. I can't be joyful and be resenting something. I can't be joyful and feel like life has cheated me. Because life hasn't cheated any of us. We just maybe didn't learn how to approach it in the most healthy, positive, uplifting way. Because our parents didn't know either. My dad certainly didn't know how to approach life. He became the sweetest, kindest man once he got in hospice. Kind of a light went on. And he was suffering from liver disease and he was all yellow. And I went to see him, and I hadn't seen him in 3 or 4 years. Because we would talk, but I don't want you coming over. And I looked at him, and his eyes were different. And I said, what's going on? He says, I don't know. I just kind of feel good. I guess now I can let go. He says, it looks like I'm a goner. I said, yeah, you look like a goner. But his wife, my stepmom, says, God, he's been so nice. Because that wasn't his style. And it's not his fault that he was that way, in the sense that it was part of his upbringing, it was part of his biology. I found out after he died that he had had electroshock therapy when he was a young man. We don't know everybody's story. He was sweet to me when I was young. But then the depression and the booze took over. You know. And I look at that and I say, where's the gift here, you know? And the gift is I got to see how not to be through my dad. That was his gift to me. This is what it looks like when you don't do it right. And my responsibility is to learn that lesson or not. And, you do or you don't. And I could resent him for not being present or emotionally present or whatever it was, but, what's the point? He was what he was. This wasn't my dad. But I've known a few people that are like that. They're captivating with their capacity for joy. But sometimes it's not real. Sometimes it's just a facade. Sometimes the most joyful person in the room, when you go up and say to them, tell me what's really going on, they break down into tears. Their sadness is so close to the surface that they've learned to mask it. We're all so tender. We just are. And we pretend we're not. John Wayne. John Wayne said, life's tough. It's tougher if you're stupid. Not very tender, but that's true, isn't it? That's true. This is one of my favorite quotes. This is the true joy of life, that being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one, that being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live it, it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die. For the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It's a sort of splendid torch which I've gotten to hold up for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. George Bernard Shaw. Are you a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments? And grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy? No, but you probably know a few. Man, who needs it? You know what I mean? Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. That's what this is all about. How can we get through this life experience, short and brutal as it can be, together? How can I help you and how can you help me? And one way we can help each other is to be an inspiration. And you say, who, me? Who am I going to inspire? Try smiling a little bit more. Unless you live in New York City, because I like to walk down the street with a smile on my face. In New York City, you're very suspect if you do that. But, what if you just said hi to people? It freaks a few out. Yeah, that's true. What do you want? No, just saying hi. We become conditioned, many of us, to thinking that someone being nice is out to get something from us. That's why they're being nice. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes that's true. You have to learn to discern. You can err on the side of trust or the side of mistrust. And if you err on the side of mistrust, you may think you're safer, but you're not, because you lose the capacity to see who you can trust. And when you err on the side of being trusting, what happens is you spot a phony much more quickly than the person who errs on the side of mistrust, because they think everybody's a phony. I know when I was in police work, and there's some trust issues among some people in police work, people would say, well, you have to prove yourself before I trust you. And I said, well, then you'll never trust anybody. And if that works for you, fine. Because if you say you have to prove that you're trustworthy, who can be that consistent, Has anybody here ever let anyone else down? Anyone? Yeah. I heard one yeah over there. Yeah. Stay away from her. But we've all done it. We've all let people down. We've all disappointed people. We've all missed appointments or failed to keep our agreements or talked behind their back or not helped out when we could have. I bet Mother Teresa did that once or twice. Everybody does. You're not exceptional in the negative because you've let some people down. And you're not exceptional in the negative because you've been let down. Perfectly normal. And it will happen again. If we don't take an attitude that we can be joyful in this process of growing together, that we give each other the benefit of the doubt, that we use what I think is the best definition of love for another. The best definition to me of love for another human being is to hold them harmless and wish them well. No matter what they've done or haven't done, no matter how well you know them. Hold them harmless, wish them well, give them the benefit of the doubt. Then you can live in joy because you're not constantly on alert waiting to be attacked or disappointed or let down or deceived. All that'll happen anyway. And you being on alert isn't going to lessen it any. When I come from a trusting heart, a broken heart becomes so obvious. And that's the only place distrust comes from, is a broken heart. Wounded people wound people. Healthy people do not wound other people. We need to heal our woundedness. We need to do more of what makes us happy, because that helps to heal. What makes you happy? What do you do? Small pleasures. Are you doing something like every week, every day, for a part of the day, maybe going to the beach or going to a movie or getting together with someone you really enjoy their company and having a glass of wine or lunch, or are you just going for a hike in the woods or something? Or is it nose to the grindstone, nose to the grindstone, nose to the grindstone? There's a great saying that said you should meditate for 20 minutes a day unless you're too busy. Then you should meditate for an hour. It's all about how we find our priorities in life. And we need to learn to see it all as a gift, as hard as that may be. Sweet Carol, your cancer is a gift. And I know you know that at some level, even though you're pretty pissed off right now about other things. I know that. It's hard when you're in the middle of it. And Kathy, I know. Anger may serve us in the short term, but love is the only thing that serves in the long term. Oh, I'm talking about joy. They're the same. They're the same. Love is all there is. Ken Kais said, every aspect of human behavior is the expression of love. Now you might have some internal reaction to that, because I'm sure you can think of a case that maybe didn't look like that. But he went on, some of it's skillful and some of it's unskillful. So our journey is not to learn to express love, because that's all we're doing. That's all there is. Our journey is to become more skillful at it by giving conscious attention to how we think and how we feel and how we act. And not using other people's apparent failure to do so as an excuse for our failure to do so. Joy is a very special experience. And it doesn't have to be momentary. Thank you, and namaste.